Hi, you might have heard the term divorce your landlord, date the rate, and marry the home that you love. Hi, my name is Phoenix with Coldwell Banker Realty here in the Orange County neighborhoods of Dana Point and Laguna Beach. Today we're going to be talking about just where the market is it the right time to buy, and the old saying, date the rate and marry the house that you love. Let's take a few steps back before we jump forward a whole heap load and talk about the market as a whole. And more importantly, we're going to geek out for just a second on basic economic principle of supply and demand. I like to call it a three-layer cake. And we're going to throw on two more options on that and make it a five-layer cake. So we're going to bake up some good stuff here. So first of all, as we see here in this graph, we're talking about supply and demand. And it doesn't matter if it's a supply and demand of a house, or it doesn't matter if it's a car or if it's a bar of soap. In this case, you can see it says soap up above. And we're talking about how supply affects demand and how demand affects supply, and also the price, right? So those are your three things: price, supply, demand. As demand increases, guess what? Prices go up. As supply decreases, prices go up. Flip that around. As demand decreases, prices come down. Or as supply increases too much, outpacing the demand, prices have to come down. Think of it as when you were trying to catch a flight. Let's say everybody was trying to catch a flight to your favorite vacation spot in Bali, right? You want to go to Bali. A billion people want to go to Bali, right? And it's super cheap to go to Bali right now. And so everybody books their price. And at first it's cheap because, the first couple people who chime in, this demand hasn't got there yet. So they're like, oh yeah, we can keep the price pretty low. And then lo and behold, the desire outpaces the supply to go to Bali. And so next thing you see is prices starting to increase, right? Same thing, if no one wanted to go to Bali, they're going to drop those prices back down, right? So very simple process that you see every day is in airplane tickets, right? That's always fluctuating. So when we talk about supply and demand, that's what we're talking about. An ideal situation would be hitting that equilibrium where supply and demand are equal. But in a real world, that doesn't happen too often. So there's your three-layer cake. We've got prices, supply, and demand, and how those three things intertwine. Now, throw on two more little hiccups, which are part of the process of economy, is inflation and interest rates. So let's talk about inflation first. And inflation is basically how much that demand gets out of control and starts pushing up those prices, or the value of the money starts decreasing, and thus prices need to go up to match what it costs to build, make, supply, whatever service. And so that's the bare basic. So I want to talk about where we've been and where we're at, right? If you look at this graph here, we've had normally sitting around 2%, a little less than 2% interest rates throughout the 1990s. Towards the end, we start seeing it kind of click just slightly above 2%, and that's totally a normal market. When we get into the 2000s, we're still pretty darn good. And lo and behold, by the second quarter of 2001, we start seeing inflation click up. And why is that? Well, besides the fact that there was a worldwide pandemic, everybody was sitting at home without anything to do. Those who had money, because the money was being sent to us from the government to pay bills, and any excess money was actually people wanting to buy stuff. We had the internet and we had Amazon, and God bless Amazon, because that must have kept the American people either preoccupied or kept the economy afloat. So that being said, we do start seeing supply chain issues and demand actually outpacing that supply. The money also getting to be a little less than what it was before, right? And so now we see 4%, 5%. Lo and behold, by end of 2001, we saw a 7% inflation rate, right? Money was getting more expensive month by month by month. That's not a good thing, right? We want, as a whole, the economy, the feds want to see prices stable, because that makes it real hard for businesses to do businessy things. And then 2003, we roll in, we've got 6%, we've got all the way down at this point, just shy of 3%, so 2.9% as of the latest numbers here in June. And that, is a good thing. We're seeing actually inflation come down after a 12-month peak last year in June, when it actually peaked out at 9%, right? So kudos to the feds. Yes, it sucks that they're raising interest rates, but it was probably a necessary and needed thing. And we're going to talk about that, and you'll see it actually with interest rates. So here we're looking at interest rates, the historic, and I'm just talking about interest rates for the housing market, the fixed average mortgage rate in America. The feds do have their own interest rate, and that also moves up. But this is a housing channel, and so we're going to talk about housing really. And I want to make that clear that we're sitting at a 7% interest rate on average right now, as of today, June 31st. And how that is historically fits into the whole paradigm of the American mortgage industry. And if you look back all the way back to 1970, you see 7.5%, so it's not that abnormal. And then in the 1970s, we also had a inflationary rate that pushed all the way through the early start of the early 80s. And so by 1975, we go from 7.5% to 10. And then we see all the way up to, by the 80s, we're hitting 16%. By 82, it looks like close to 18%. I've even heard as high as 20, 21, 22% for people who had worse credits. This is like an ideal credit score, or an average of that people. So that made housing get really hard and really unaffordable for people. And so here with this other graph, you can kind of see with the blue line on the lower end behind the red here, that's the affordability rate, right? And so housing got very unaffordable, and rightly so. And so as the market economy started calming down, as they were raising rates at that point, started coming out of that inflation rate in the early 80s, you start seeing mortgage rates click back down to make it more affordable for people. And so we come down, by the lo and behold, in the end of the, let's say, start of the 90s, we're right around 10%. And then we kind of click through, and by the 2000s, we're sitting, close to 8% to maybe, let's just say 8% right there. And then you have the dot-com bomb, if you remember that, if you're old enough to remember that. And really, it was just a kind of a recession in its own self. A lot of speculation during the early days of the internet, and some people made it, some people didn't. There's a lot of companies that, if you remember that time period, that no longer exist. I can name a few, but that's for a video another day. But that being said, after that point, the feds got really aggressive to try to make home building a priority, and then Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they also kind of put in their 2 cents, and they were trying to make things more affordable. And so they had implemented this idea of trying to get everybody who wants to buy a home to buy a home. Well, lo and behold, what happened in 2008? Well, we had a crash in the housing market because a lot of the, as they say, subprime, not prime, not good more loans, they failed. And so giving a house to everyone was not necessarily the right answer, even though ideally it is. And so you're seeing that that affected the economy. Banks went under, lots of investors, lots of people lost their money in both stocks, bonds, businesses, and more importantly, the mom and pops, Main Street people who lost money in their housing, who may have had to sell that house out after they lost their jobs. So all these things put a big ripple effect into it. And so the Fed, in their infinite wisdom, decided, hey, we need to keep the economy running hot. We need to move it back up to where people are out buying again. So again, what do? They drop the rates even more. So now by the 2010s, to try to stimulate the government going here, we dropped from 6% 7%, 6%, somewhere in that ballpark, down to the 5%, rolling into the 4% in the 2015s. And then we started kind of clicking back up because the Fed did need to do that. They started needing to bring that value of what the interest rates are back up to a more normal place. And then lo and behold, COVID, a worldwide pandemic that affected the entirety of the world. And so everybody was like, we got to do something, right? We can't have people just wither away at home. We need to keep the economy going, but at the same time, we need to keep people at home. And so that laid a real big dilemma. And so what did they do? They dropped rates. So they wanted to keep businesses moving forward, even though we weren't really able to work, or we kind of had to modify our work, or we weren't working as much and working from home, and it got complicated. So that being said, we see 3% and then down into 2% by late 2001. And all of that money, let's say that cheap money, because means that it was a lot cheaper to do something with that money, to borrow that money than it was back in the 80s, right? So we went from like 20% to 2%, right? That's a big 18% jump. So that did affect the economy. A little sometimes goes a long way, and a lot can be too much. And I think that was a little bit too much. And that's where we're seeing this place where back in, the last decade, we've seen housing push up where prices kept going up and up and up and up, what we call appreciation of value of your home. And then lo and behold, we saw bidding wars. Like, that wasn't a new thing in the late 2000s, but by 2020, 2021, 2022, bidding wars got nuts. I mean, if you weren't like literally just giving them a paper check and just say, you know what, you just fill it out. I want to buy your house, right? I don't care how much it's going to cost. Just take this piece of paper and make a suit out of it for all I care and rub it on your naked body. Because that was what you had to do to buy a house then, because it got so nuts. Lo and behold, I've got my license in a couple of different states here, Florida, Colorado, California. Denver saw, 20, 30% jumps in housing value. Here in California, in Southern California, we saw houses go for $100,000, $200,000 over ask. Just bonkers. Florida, same thing. I mean, just crazy. Maybe not 200,000 because those prices weren't there, but we definitely saw, significant increases, 60, 70% value jumps overnight. Just crazy. So, that's what it means when you have too much of a good thing, when interest rates get too low. So now we have our 5-layer cake, and you can see now how they intertwine with each other now. So where we're at now here is a place where you would think interest rates have moved up 7%. The economy has started to cool, but not crashed, not a recession. And so that's where we're at currently economically. With the housing market, we're seeing something interesting, and we're going to talk about that here. So as I mentioned here is just a quick screenshot of of how many people bought homes just in the last couple of years, right? Interest rates were really low in 2000, 2001. And so these current owners don't want to sell to take a 3% loan for a 7% loan. Plus, there's a lot of them that actually did it, right? A lot of people actually accomplished that goal while it was a lot cheaper. But there are people out there, there is a demand still out there because of the general just life cycle of buying a home. Some of us want to buy because we are getting our first home. Some of us are going into our second home because we're having a couple of kids. Some of us are now downsizing because the kids are going off to college. Some of us are actually getting rid of even a medium to small home to go move in with friends or family, or, there are all these different situations at different parts of people's lives who kind of move up and move down in the situation of buying a house. So lots of them moved. They don't want the 7% loan now. Okay, so keep that in mind. So that takes them off the table. So here's a graph of the overall housing starts and permits pulled from 2006 onward here, and you can see, right, we had the peak of that building boom in the late 2000s, and then housing crash in 2007 at the end of that, because there was a lot of smoke and warning signs. And then you don't see anybody start building again until around the end of 2011, and then roughly into the 2012s. And that's when I saw it too, being in the market. I was already a realtor at that point. And so you see things kind of move up, but you can see here that builders have never gotten back to that graph. So again, that was another part of that equation, which people forget, just because of the prices were cheap, was part of the overall seller's market that we've had for the last decade. But also you see not enough builders building, right? And some of it has to do with just some of the ancillary businesses behind that never came back from '08, or then builders were too gun shy to say, look, we're not going to build because we lost our pants in 2008 with all these houses that got unfinished or just no one ever lived in. And so they didn't want to do that again. So they've been trying to, kind of build out as needed. And that's called lean supply management. It's a different subject for a different day and a different video. But just know that they have pulled back as well. And then you have your investors, and I did mention this, your investors who maybe have different businesses that support the housing market have also kind of pulled back because it's getting too expensive for them to borrow money and make something or do something with that money, whether it's a service or a widget, doesn't matter. And so they're also kind of pulling back. And so you're seeing an inventory decrease, but demand is still outpacing that inventory. Back to supply and demand, right? So this is why I wanted to talk about that first. Bam, there it is. And so again, what happens when we have demand outpacing the supply? Refer back to the chart. Prices go up. There's the answer. Say it with me, boys and girls. Prices go up. So when prices go up, that's what we're seeing. So we're still seeing maybe not the craziness that we saw in the last 2 years, and we got real comfortable with those 2, 3, 4% interest rates. And yes, they are higher than we are, but not nationally, or not historically. But, again, demand is still outpacing supply. And so that brings me back to the subject of the day. If supply is outpacing demand, then where are prices going to go, right? They're going up, right? So it's probably better time to buy because we're still seeing, as we see here in this chart or this graph, prices are still moving up, right? And it's almost a straight darn line from 1970, right? If you cut through, I threw that little black line in there, but the blue line obviously is just showing prices on the home seller index. That's going up. It's moving up, and it's moving up pretty consistently. Here's another little just blip here, 1990s onward. We're seeing it actually outpace inflation, right? So owning a house is beating the market inflation issue, right? So that's another reason to own a house right now. So if interest rates are high, the Feds have already signaled that they're going to keep bumping interest rates up till we get to about a 2%, and that this is not baked into the economy. Interest rates, or the value of trying to buy a home, is also going to be more expensive. We talked about affordability there. So again, all those things could happen. Now, if, the other side of that, as the interest rates go up, supply stays the same or goes down, demand holds, we should see prices go up. And that's what we're seeing right now. So that's why we're not in a buyer's market. And I have tons of people saying, well, when is this buyer's market coming? And, the buyer's market that I've seen in the last 10 years has probably been now and during COVID, when everybody was scared, and not really since 2010. I really haven't seen any of that since then. 2009, 2010. And so it kind of goes back to the old adage of don't buy something when there's blood in the streets, not when everybody is happy and content and the economy is booming. Because if that's what you're looking for, then you need to search out those particular times in history to buy. And it's really hard to see the forest from the trees when you're in the thick of the woods. So sometimes perspective helps here. And this is what I'm trying to show you. if the interest rates go too far, which the Feds don't want, in other words, if they raise them way too high and blow past the inflation, then this is why they've been kind of chugging away chip by chip, month after month, and not big numbers like a percent here, percent there, right? That would cause demand to decrease. And then ultimately supply would catch up, and then prices would start to decrease. Again, supply and demand issues. So that's what we're talking about. The other way this could play out is at some point, the Feds will have to ease up. They're going to have to start decreasing those interest rates. And as interest rates come back down, demand's going to start picking back up, but we're not going to have the supply. And I've already talked about that because it's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years maybe to catch up. And we saw that in 2008, a good decade for them to catch up. Really, like all the ancillary business, not just the builders, but the people who make wiring, the people who make furnaces and HVAC systems and air conditioned systems, and people who quit putting insulation in houses, all that stuff, right? So all those people have to come back to the market. And that's what is also kind of a speed bump to kind of rebuilding. And that takes time. It's an orchestra of people. It doesn't take 3 months to build a house. It takes longer than a year, to be honest with you. And when you go to a builder, they'll tell you that honestly. They'll usually say, look, we've already started this house, so it's going to be less than a year. Or, you know what, we haven't even broke the ground. Plan for it to be a year, right? I was even seeing back in before the pandemic, I had buyers wanting to buy, and they literally were telling us, get in line. There's a waiting list. We can't even tell you the price because the price is going to change based on how many people we have in our waiting list. Nuts, because they knew there wasn't enough inventory. And I'm sure they loved it, but buyers hated it. That was brutal to be told, oh, you can't even buy this house, and we can't even tell you what the price is until we get to the housing start permit done. And then we can tell you we're going to build 20 houses, even though their waiting list is probably 40, 50 people deep. So that could happen. And again, if interest rates drop way too much, we'll be back in that 2002, 2001 kind of, everybody's trying to buy because it's cheap to buy right now, right? But instead of buying when everybody wants to buy, how about buy when people don't want to buy? Because instead of buying with all the bidding wars, buy when there's not. Let me say that again. Instead of buying with bidding wars, buy when people aren't buying that much, right? You've got a good market, it's going to hold, and you have low inventory. So as that interest rates keep coming up, as the inventory stays low, when we get out of this, there's going to be, I guarantee you, another boom. We're going to be back to a seller's market. So right now, I'd say it's probably an equilibrium, probably the best I've seen in years. Not a seller's market, not a buyer's market, pretty darn equal here. Buy now, even if the interest rate's at 7, 8, 9%, because when interest rates drop, everybody comes back to the market. But you'll already have the house that you want. Also, you will be able to just refinance. You don't have to go through a bidding war, 20,000 over ask, or 50,000 or 100, God forbid. But we're going to be back there. I guarantee you. I will put money on it. We will be back there again in just a couple of years. So that's why I am telling you one last time to summarize. Inventory is going to be low. When rates drop, you refinance. Find the house now, buy the house that you love, refinance and date that rate now, but refinance when it is able to do so, period. Now, the last caveat of that is, look, if you can't afford a house right now, then don't buy a house. That's just common sense. If you're going to be house poor, don't do that. So just keep that in mind. But that's really the only caveat. If you're waiting on the fence for something to happen, now's the time. You got to buy when there's blood in the streets, as the old saying goes, not when everybody else is buying. This is Phoenix saying, thank you guys very much for paying attention and hearing me out. I hope you have find the house that you love. If you need help finding that house here in Orange County or in the Denver metro area, I'm happy to help you in both areas. I have teams in both towns, and yeah, we'll jump right on it and get you the right place at the right price. This is Phoenix signing off. Have a great day. God bless you. See you later.